senior members of our society, guests, ladies and gentlemen. I stand before you with little pride, but with considerable humility as I attempt to deliver the Rajan Memorial Oration for the year 2019. I do not know why I was chosen to deliver this oration. And when I asked Dr. Ramesh, Rajan, his son, for some pictures which included both of us, he sent me these pictures from a late 80s tour to Russia and a freezing wintry day in February. He also mentioned tongue-in-cheek that he thought I was an apt person for the oration, and also argued that orations are meant for those who sort of retired from active cutting. And I wonder if the organizers are providing a broad hint, which I shall certainly consider as I go along. Professor Rajan has been a colossus who was in the field of gastrointestinal surgery. From his early days and his first years in Edinburgh up until the end of his surgical career and over 4 decades, he made significant achievements in the field of surgical gastroenterology, the most notable being the surgical gastroenterology department in India, the first one in Trivandrum in the year 1975. I have known him for more than 3 decades, and there are many things which stood out about the man. He always dressed well, and alas, I cannot ever hope to match up to his sartorial elegance. He was always concerned about the patient. He was always willing to share his knowledge. He was willing to engage with all ages, especially the young, especially if they were the fair sex. And he had always warmth and affection for fellow humanity. Unfortunately, the story of pancreatic cancer is not as exciting as the career of Professor Rajan. Even in stage 1 and 2 disease, the survival is 17.6 and 8.1%, and regardless of ethnic, race, or country or region. If we had to try and analyze what were the survival reasons for pancreatic cancer and look at the bad signs, there is now ample evidence that the size of the tumor, and thank God for the AJCC8, which has incorporated size of the tumor and the grade in terms of prognosis. So the larger the tumor, the worse the prognosis. If you take at least 16 lymph nodes during overall resection, the number of involved lymph nodes is obviously an important factor. The lymph node station 14 at the root of the superior mesenteric artery is a real bad sign, and if it's involved, there's a deep dip in the survival. Contiguous spread to the lymph node is not such a bad deal, but metastasis to the lymph node is. Where does the recurrence happen? Whether it's local or, as everyone believes, is it systemic in all cases? This is a fairly old paper which suggests that local recurrence occurs in 3/4 of the cases, but they were combined in half. And in fact, most of the patients did not die of local recurrence. Fast forward to a recent paper from Johns Hopkins, and of 692 patients, whereas distant metastasis occurred in 63%, there were more than a quarter had isolated local recurrence. And so we must understand that there is a local failure as well that does happen, at least in some patients. The problem with local recurrence is that they are difficult to diagnose histology. Just some thickenings, just some uptake on PET CT, and not biopsyable. They are unsalvageable because resection may not be feasible. And by the time the patient dies, there are metastases everywhere. Let's carry this local control theme further. What is the impact of various factors in terms of recurrence of the disease? This is a paper from Shizuoka. Sugiura is the first author, and there is now increasing data to suggest that if we have a margin of more than 1 millimeter, the survival or the local recurrence rates are much lower than the margins were under 1 millimeter or the margins were involved where the 50% have local recurrence. And in fact, none of the other factors, lymph nodes, peritoneum, liver, or other distant metastases, really made a difference as far as local recurrence is concerned. and this has been reproduced from other centers as well. Which is the worst margin? Of the bile duct margin, of the pancreatic neck margin, of the retroperitoneal margin seems to be the worst. And if you have the posterior margin involvement, you can see that the survival curve dips alarmingly. Even a portal vein infiltration, a type C and type D portal infiltration, which correlates very well with media and intima involvement, is a clear sign of posterior involvement. And obviously, the more the posterior involvement or the margin involvement, the worse the prognosis in terms of recurrence rates. This is a humongous paper from the Midwest of America, Parikh and Syed Ahmed. 392 surgery alone, 291 patients with surgery and adjuvant chemotherapy, and 447 patients who had surgery with adjuvant chemo and radiotherapy. The chemotherapy did improve the survival overall, but not in the chemoradiation group where there was only improvement in local recurrence rates. But the bottom line seemed to be that it was understandable that the lymph node positive patients fared better, but margin negative patients were the only ones where the improvement really occurred. So if your margins were positive, you could use chemotherapy, radiation, and what else, but you would not be able to make an impact or positive impact on the patient outcomes. Similar results have been published from Johns Hopkins, and a recent study just this month, a multi-center European study group for pancreatic cancer in the annals has revealed a posterior resection margin as the key to all success in pancreatic cancer surgery. The same is true for periapical carcinoma, and in fact, in periapical carcinoma involves the pancreas. Pretty much the results are as bad or sometimes even worse. The converse is also true, that if you have a small tumor size, if you have lymph nodes which are negative, and if you have a negative resection margin, the prospect of long-term survival is substantial. So what can we do as surgeons? I suggest that we can approach the problem in 4 ways. We can try and do early diagnosis and surveillance of high-risk groups. We can try and address the disease at the molecular level. We can use multimodality therapy, including neoadjuvant therapy, and perhaps try and do a better operation, or can we not? High-risk groups are very good to analyze, but they are very difficult to nail down. They are very difficult to pick up the cancers. In fact, cancers seem to stealthily insinuate themselves into the clinical picture, even in patients with idiopathic pancreatitis, tropical pancreatitis, hereditary pancreatitis, IPMN, and in many cases just come out with distant metastases. Biomarkers have not really been able to consistently help, and if the best bet seems to be that every 40-year-old who has ulcer-negative dyspepsia or weight loss must be evaluated for pancreatic cancer if we have to diagnose more cases early. Pancreatic intraepithelial neoplasia represents an important intermediate stage in the development of cancer. It's great if you can diagnose them, but you need biopsy. And while it's present in more than 80% of invasive pancreatic cancers, maybe a case of little too late. Why don't we address the cancer at the molecular level? There has been a huge progress in understanding of the transformation of the cancer from a normal duct epithelium to the ductal adenocarcinoma through the various stages, as we see here. However, genome sequencing analysis has revealed that each pancreatic cancer may have as many as 119 somatic chromosomal structural alterations per patient. And this is a bewildering state of affairs. In short, what we have is a cancer stem cell which escapes chemotherapy in many cases. And if you add to it the fact that there is an epithelial to mesenchymal transition, this is a ripe situation for lymphovenous spread and distant metastasis. Such is really a failure of immunoediting and how things really go wrong. Biomarkers have, to some extent, been able to distinguish pancreatic cancer at a molecular level into the classical green, the classical red, the exocrine green, and the quasi-mesenchymal blue, with this having the quasi-mesenchymal having the worst prognosis. It's also now been possible that you can treat these different cases, different categories differently by targeting downstream survival pathways, targeting stromal responses, targeting the tumor vasculature, or targeting the tumor immune response itself. Some of these molecules are already in place and they are being used in routine practice, but there have been disappointments as well. The most notable being ibrutinib, which has not stood the test in human trials, and also minaline, which came with much promise, heat shock protein antagonist, which has not really stood the test in human trials. Perhaps the best thing that we can do is not to mourn for the past, not to worry about the future or anticipate troubles, but live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. And stick to trying to achieve grossly and microscopically negative margin, which can translate to better survival. And how do we achieve this? As surgeons, we often tend to say that the biology of the patient is more important and blame our positive margins either on poor patient selection or tumor biology and not on our operative technique. And I've been guilty of using this aphorism more often than not, that biology is king, imaging the queen, and technique merely the manservant. And let me try and prove the converse, that perhaps what as surgeons we can do is to concentrate on operative technique and multimodality therapy, and really doing the operation properly so that the patients don't die. If we can do safe resection with negative margins, goal-directed fluid therapy during surgery so that we don't have an edematous bowel at the end of during anastomosis. If we do a safe anastomosis which doesn't leak, or if it leaks, if we manage the pancreatic fistulae and the postoperative bleeds very energetically and efficiently, and most importantly, use neoadjuvant and adjuvant therapy judiciously, then the prospect is that your early cancers will survive, and therefore they will have the potential for long-term survival. There's been so much progress on multimodality therapy, both adjuvant and neoadjuvant. And unfortunately, the patient performance status is what determines what kind of chemotherapy can be given. And often we have to settle for a lesser chemotherapeutic agent because of patient performance status, and that is the inherent problem of neoadjuvant therapy. I'd like to share this paper published from the Mayo Clinic in 2016, a humongous study, 593 patients, out of which 377 underwent neoadjuvant therapy, 216 which underwent upfront surgery. Most notably, a quarter of the neoadjuvant patients did not receive surgery, did not progress to surgery, and 14% of the upfront surgery patients never received chemotherapy. Yet, on an intention to treat analysis, there was a substantial and significant improvement in survival with neoadjuvant therapy, and that's something that we have to put in our pipe and smoke, and really something that we may have to imbibe. It's a no-brainer to think of neoadjuvant therapy in a locally advanced or a borderline resectable cancer, but what we are now asking ourselves is, if you have a primary resectable pancreatic cancer, should we operate or should we refer the patient to an oncologist to put into a trial of preoperative neoadjuvant therapy and consider both options, upfront surgery and upfront neoadjuvant chemotherapy? There is a lot of data, and unfortunately all the data is not conclusively in favor of neoadjuvant therapy for various logistic and complex reasons. And although the results of the ground have not yet matched the expectations, perhaps it is a question of getting the job done properly, and that's something that we should look forward in the future. One thing that we can definitely decide today is to embrace the NCCN suggestion. I wouldn't call it a guideline, but a suggestion, that the large tumor over 4 centimeters of size, large regional lymph nodes, a patient with a high CA19-9, a patient with excessive weight loss, or a patient with extreme pain without obvious retroperitoneal involvement, and a poor performance status, surely these patients must be taken into a neoadjuvant protocol, if nothing else. And finally, I want to concentrate on the question, which is something that's assailed my enfeebled intellect all these years: are we doing the operation well enough? And I want to just present to you for your consumption and consideration some simple points. Everyone talks about superior mesenteric artery first or last, but I would like to present the concept of superior mesenteric artery always. I don't care whether you reach it first or last, but why don't we get there eventually? And if we are able to dissect the front, the right wall, right side and the back of the superior mesenteric artery, so we will preserve enough nerves for enteral function as well as have good clearance. The concept that if you do not have abutment to the superior mesenteric vein, then you can very well approach the superior mesenteric artery from the right wall of the superior mesenteric vein. On the other hand, as you can see in this video, it's a very simple video clip which shows that at all times the aim of the surgeon is to address the superior mesenteric artery and try to expose in the middle of the uncinate process, which is the easiest place to locate the superior mesenteric artery, and then to work oneself up and down and expose the superior mesenteric artery. When I was a resident, Michael Hopsley dropped by, and he taught us that to do a good parotidectomy, we needed to dissect the facial nerve. Forget the parotid, dissect the facial nerve, he said. And I probably would like to suggest, forget the uncinate process, dissect the superior mesenteric artery. Not circumferentially, but in the manner that I just described. That's the inferior pancreatic duodenal artery being ligated. And as you can see, at all times the artery is in view, the vein is simply rotated out of its way. You may tape it if you like, that's up to you. On the other hand, if there is abutment, as you can see here, traditionally we tend to dissect in this region and then expose the superior mesenteric vein, and this is probably not a great idea because you will get more positive margins. It is a greater idea to dissect on the left wall of the superior mesenteric vein, expose the superior mesenteric artery, and here we probably need a sling which would go in front of the root of the superior mesenteric artery, and that will allow you to expose the tissue that you wish to transect. And once you have transected that, then you have the specimen hanging on the superior mesenteric vein. You must, of course, expose the superior mesenteric artery, again not circumferentially necessarily, or preferably not, but at least expose it so that your instrument can pass anterior to it or to the right of it. It's very well to do the Patrick Pessor, Deepak Verma approach, but I found it very technically difficult even with extended cauterization, and although this looks good on the slide, it's not so easy on paper. This is one instance where a sling, passage of a sling can actually make things easy for you, and if you get a sling encompassing the specimen as well as superior mesenteric vein, then you know what is the area or what is the limit of your dissection, which is the biggest problem in a Whipple resection. In some cases, especially today, we use neoadjuvant chemotherapy, we re-explore patients, we do not want to tread into the area of the uncinate process in case the patient is not going to be R0 resection and you want to place the patient for, say, further radiotherapy. In such cases, a transmesochoric approach is preferable. Of course, it has the negative problem that you end up encircling the superior mesenteric artery and vein. This is an incision being placed, this is a DTA flexure, a transverse incision after palpating the root of the superior mesenteric vessels and dissection of all the branches. And now we see that the jejunal vessels are all ligated in their in situ position, and there is no curve of the vessels towards the left as we encounter the traditional dissections. So once we do this, we are able to expose the pancreatic neck at the end of the vascular dissection, determine if the tumor is resectable. If it is not, you can simply abandon and take the patient through a radiation protocol. And you can see that the pancreatic neck is showing up here. The bad branches are being ligated. One would like to stay around the periadventitial area if possible to preserve some of the lymphatics, but I'm afraid inevitably there is the nerves, but inevitably the nerves are affected, and then you can get postoperative enteral dysfunction, but patients eventually improve. And it's important to get an R0 resection. This is the neck of the pancreas, the uncinate process dissection is completed, and then you decide whether you're going to do a resection or not. At the end of such an approach, everything hangs on the superior mesenteric vein. You can decide then whether you need to resect the superior mesenteric vein, a sleeve resection, or a segmental resection. If you want a graft, if you think it cannot be encompassed, you can have time to harvest a graft. You can decide to look for the PTFE graft if you want to use a PTFE. All those options are available because the specimen is hanging on the superior mesenteric vein, and it gives you the additional the freedom to decide whether it's resectable or not. A final technical issue is of a patient such as this who's had a superior mesenteric vein resection. The pancreatic stump is seen here. And you can see the celiac axis and the superior mesenteric artery. And there is so much vascular and connective tissue, which is essentially a continuation of the proximal jejunal mesentery. It's really like the profile of a very obese person with two bulges on either side of the superior mesenteric artery because of the problems of rotation. And actually, regardless of what you may do with the current situation, most resections, and we were privileged to see some very brilliant pancreatic surgery in Korea a week ago, but even there, the surgeon tended to go along the jejunum, and even here, there was no complete resection of the Arseneck process. Even with dissection along these lines is technically difficult unless we delivered the jejunum over to the left, to the right side. And I just want to show a final video clip which shows again that the artery is the center of attraction. The artery is the cynosure of your dissection. The jejunum has been rotated to the right. The fold that sort of tethers it to the root of the mesentery is cleared. And now we have a situation akin to right hemicolectomy, where anyone in a reasonable frame of mind is able to decide what is the vascular lines along which the mesentery is going to be divided. And at all times, the aim is to approach the superior mesenteric artery. This also has an ancillary benefit in that the proximal jejunum is actually much more mobile. It allows it a much better lie for a pancreatogegenostomy and also for a hepatogegenostomy. Sometimes otherwise the pancreatic, the proximal jejunal mesentery tethers the jejunum, especially in an obese person. And here if you see, all the vessels are on the right, so there is no recurving branches of the proximal jejunal veins. You just have to ligate. It's a continuum of the Arseneck process, and the entire tissue here has been resected. The artery is in view at all times and has never left our view. And at the end of the resection, you will have the entire Arseneck process resected. As far as I am concerned, it's fine to do the operation by open laparoscopic or robotic approaches, provided we can tick our own boxes, what other boxes that we have. I would like to end with 4 final points. In many cases, vascular limitations, and most notably celiac axis syndrome, preclude resection. And I want to just show you a couple of cases. The first, and this is a patient operated by Vivero when he was with us many years ago. A patient who had apparently resectable tumor, but who had celiac axis syndrome, and the inflow was from obviously superior mesenteric artery. He had a resection and also an anastomosis to actually what was a retropancreatic collateral. And the patient is alive and well 8 years later, has suffered a myocardial infarction in the interim period. So don't give up on your patients just like that. Another patient with chronic pancreatitis and pancreatic cancer, and this patient was, I think, seen by Dr. Prakash in Aster, who during the resection, my colleague Jacob found that once he clamped the gastroduodenal artery, he lost pulsation completely of the hepatic artery, and therefore it became imperative that unless we reconstructed the inflow into the liver, we could not complete the resection, and then that would be accomplished and the patient is well 2 years later. And last but not the least, especially in periambulatory carcinomas, do consider that you can even preserve the gastroduodenal artery and take away the pancreas. It is possible. Or preserve the largest collateral or collateral arc, as you can see in this case, and that's an option. So for vascular reasons, it's not a great idea to give up on an operation, because these are the patients who seem to survive the longest. The second point is to talk about what I saw in UpToDate, and I'm sure you all use UpToDate. And I present this new concept that if you have a non-metastatic pancreatic cancer, the fact that we must consider enrolling them in clinical trials, and perhaps that's another idea that the Association of Surgical Gastroenterologists of Kerala must embrace. I think we can standardize techniques, and I think we can standardize approaches, and perhaps we can have a rich load of data to tell the world how to manage pancreatic cancer from the surgical point of view. The third point is that it's most important to give quality of life. We cannot have patients who are basket cases who just fulfill the objectives of the surgeons or the oncologists. It's important to add life to years, not years to life. And I'm always emphasize telling the patient, telling myself, that I'm not worried about dying, but I'm worried about living or not living properly. And therefore, I would like to exhort everyone to use a quality of life questionnaire. We have the PAN 28 questionnaire, which can be added to the URC QLK questionnaire, which is a very good tool for assessing quality of life. And lastly, nothing is possible without teamwork. And a multimodality approach to pancreatic cancer will do a lot of good to both the physician and the patient. And this is the best option that we can see. I would like to close by thanking all my friends in the Association of Surgical Gastroenterologists in Kerala, all of whom I've known for many, many years, and with whom I have made everlasting friendships and cemented friendships. In fact, speaking in front of our own family is much more stressful, and I was perhaps more nervous than I needed to be, and I'm not sure if I have delivered what Dr. Rajan would have liked to say, which is to say that love your patients and treat them very well. I thank you for your attention.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ramesh, in fact, I wanted to introduce you. I'm quite sure, Professor Rajan would have been immensely pleased for an oration by you in his name, because NR considers HR as one of the backbones of surgical gastroenterology in Kerala. Thank you for the oration. And all of you agree that it was one of the best orations.
May I also venture to suggest that Professor Rajan always talks about interaction. And I think I finished well in time. We could even have a discussion, because that will be the biggest tribute you can have to his memory. Because I hate orations where somebody gets away with whatever they say without a riposte from the audience. I think we should have at least 2 minutes of discussion or comments from the audience before we close, as a memory to the great man.
Any comments from the audience?
So in your practice, you've already seen a lot of pancreatic cancer. So when you have a positive neck margin, what is your practice?
We would resect back on the body and tail of the pancreas, and in several cases we've had to do several dissections. The simple, I can sort of anticipate your question, is whether you would consider a total pancreatectomy. Considering the fact that locally advanced pancreatic cancer has, as we have said, has many dimensions of spread, it seems pointless to just take out the pancreas alone. So I would consider it sufficient to get a new margin which is negative, rather than to take the entire pancreas out.
Now, with today's advancements in radiotherapy, would you think of giving radiation instead of going back and operating?
I think the paper from Ahmed and Parikh have shown us that if you have positive margins, you pretty much lost it. You have only two choices. One is to say, well, that's it. And you have to confess to yourself and your patient that the surgery didn't work. Giving radiotherapy in that position seems to be a kind of a lottery. It doesn't seem to really work. And I think if you have the collective strength of mind, you must be able to even go back and dissect. I feel we should do that. Although I confess I haven't done it yet. Now I'm really nervous.
I'm here. In a CCP with CA and adenocarcinoma of pancreas, so will you go such an extent if the patient has a CCP with a CA of pancreas? What exactly is the difference? Pure adenocarcinoma and CCP with adenocarcinoma?
Our data is unfortunately unpublished, but it's now clearly, it appears that stage for stage there is no difference. It's just that in chronic pancreatitis cancers, it seems to be diagnosed later because of the fact that the pain of cancer is indistinguishable in many cases to the pain of pancreatitis. Although continuous pain along with weight loss is a pathognomonic sign of the onset of malignancy. Often we only do surgery after jaundice supervenes and after there is spread, extra pancreatic spread. So in my opinion, or in our data suggests that pancreatic cancer stage for stage is just the same. So treat it on par with de novo cancer. But be aware that we seem to diagnose these cases later. And that's something that we need to examine whether really early surgery can decrease cancer. That's a hugely controversial subject, and that it is probably beyond the scope of this forum at the moment.
I must be really fortunate to witness this great event. And thank God for that. My question is, how do you compare the biology of de novo cancer pancreas and CCT-related cancer pancreas? Actually, we have some small study on that. But what's your take on comparing the biology of de novo CA pancreas and carcinoma arising in
I've got a question. Could you share your data, please? Because I have already said what my opinion, my data suggests.
Okay, actually we have done a small comparative study on these, and it shows that when you compare these arms, well-differentiated tumors predominate in CCT. That is, 60% of them come in the well-differentiated type. Whereas in de novo type, it's 50-50, really, almost 50-50. And the lymph node metastatic incidence also a bit less in the carcinoma arising in CCT. Then maybe due to the fibrosis blocking the lymphatic channels, we don't know. We need to explore that.
So your suggestion is that de novo cancers fare more poorly.
Maybe so.
That would be
On the other hand, CCP cancers are better. They arise due to chronic inflammation, and these fibrosis block the lymphatic spread. Maybe we need to explore on these sides.
Perhaps. I think we cannot make any judgments based on small data. Having said that, the biggest concern is that in all cancers of the GI tract, timing of diagnosis is critical. If you have early gastric cancer, obviously the outcome is better than if you have advanced cancer. So similarly, if you are able to diagnose carcinoma of the pancreas as a focus in a chronic pancreatitis, is obviously a better outcome, and we have to focus on finding ways of screening, ways of detection, and that will make an impact on the outcome.
Sir, can I have ask a question? Is in tropical pancreatitis, you have done a phrase, and one table frozen was negative, and sometimes it happens. In the post-op, it comes as malignancy. You have already opened up and did a phrase. Did you go in and?
Our pathology reports come in a little late, unfortunately, and it would be a week at least before they come back. And the options seem to be to counsel the patient. And you have three options. One is to reoperate and do a total pancreatectomy, having told the patient that already tumor lines have been breached and there is obviously spread and it is not the optimal therapy. Anyway, take the patient through a multimodality approach to a tumor board who would suggest that they would do a PET CT, rule out distant metastasis, and then chemotherapy. Now, we've had 2 patients so far in whom we have gone back and done resection. The longest survivor in that has been 36 months, which is not bad. So again, my recommendation even for locally advanced cancer is not to just say best supportive care, but in an intention to treat basis, give neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That can either become palliative or a neoadjuvant depending on the patient response. If the patient responds, you re-explore, if required by a transmesochoric approach. If it's not doing well enough, close and do radiotherapy. And now 16 patients have been salvaged like this. And with significant quality of life, they're doing their work. So we have to have a proactive approach to these patients in order to get some benefit. I think one of the problems with the multimodality approach is that the ASCO recommendation is for best supportive care if the CA19-9 levels are a certain level. and then we just follow it blindly, and perhaps that's not the answer.
Sir, in operable custom-head pancreas with obstructive jaundice, does this change the practice of neoadjuvant therapy? Because the presence of obstructive jaundice in operable custom-head of pancreas. When you have, the guideline is now to give neoadjuvant and then pay. So will you stent?
The presence of obstructive jaundice, there are three categories now. There is clearly resectable cancer, borderline resectable cancer, and locally advanced cancer. In each of these groups, you can give neoadjuvant therapy. If you're going to give neoadjuvant therapy, you must get the jaundice below 3%, 3 milligrams percent. That's the oncologist's requirement. So you have to place a short metal stent and hope that the patient's jaundice comes back to normal quickly. Now, and also get an US guided FNA to get biopsy proof, without which you can't put the patient through a neoadjuvant chemo or a chemoradiation regimen. Our preference is for a sequential approach, not chemoradiation, but chemotherapy followed by radiotherapy. You know there is a big divide across the Atlantic. One group wants chemoradiation, one wants chemotherapy, and no real conclusions have been drawn just yet.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Professor Anandakumar M. to present a memento as a token of gratitude and appreciation to the orator, Dr. H. Ramesh. Please, sir.